Hello and welcome to the Gaming Society Radio Hour. I'm co-host James.
And I'm Matthew.
And thank you for joining us extra early today. We are excited here because you, the listener, are about to embark on a 2-hour journey with Matt and I into the Star Wars universe. How excited are you, Matt?
Oh, I'm so excited. Been waiting for this for so long.
Matt and I have been talking about we really wanted to have a show where we talked all about Star Wars, and it just so happened that the show before us needed someone to fill in, so we're going to have an extra long time slot to talk all about Star Wars. Matt and I are huge fans here. So what's the big news, Matt? What are we going to talk about first?
We got a new trailer recently, Rogue One. Very excited. A teaser trailer, as you so often have told me.
Yep. So do you want to talk a little bit first before? What we're going to do is we're going to play the trailer, and we're going to pause it periodically, talk a little bit about what's going on, and speculate. Most of our speculations are going to end up being wrong, as speculations want to do when the movie comes out, but we're going to speculate anyway because it's fun to do. But before we get there, Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about what Rogue One the movie is?
Well, I have a much different opinion already based on the trailer than you do about what Rogue One is. As far as I can tell from what I've seen in the trailer, it's some type of an adventure movie where they're... actually, let's go for the premise first. I think that's probably what you're going for.
What is objectively true about what Rogue One is?
Okay. All right. It's a film about the rebel spies who stole the plans for the Death Star before A New Hope.
So these are the plans that Princess Leia eventually puts into R2-D2 at the beginning of A New Hope.
Yeah, really, this is the driving force that created the entire plot of the original trilogy.
All right. So with that out of the way, we're going to start playing this trailer here, pausing periodically to speculate. So here we go.
State your name for the record.
Jyn Erso.
Forgery of Imperial documents, possession of stolen property, aggravated assault, resisting arrest.
All right, so right off the bat, we know that we've got a new female protagonist, it seems like.
Yeah, very excited about that, finally.
And the shot that we just saw is her being led through what looks like the bunker on Yavin 4, which, for those of you who don't know what that is the rebel base in the middle of in the woods, in what sort of looks like a temple toward the end of A New Hope. The Battle of Yavin is actually the 0 year in the Star Wars universe. The Battle of Yavin is the battle in which the first Death Star is destroyed in A New Hope. So what we just saw, we don't know this, but it looks exactly like the interior of the rebel base on Yavin 4.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. My guess is that the beginning of the movie will probably take place here, and then we'll quickly fan out to the actual spying and heist portion of the movie.
Right. So what this means is before the teaser trailer came out, when we only knew about the concept of Rogue One, and that was that it was when the Death Star plans were stolen, we knew then that it would take place before A New Hope, but we didn't know if that would be a couple months or a couple years before A New Hope. But what this essentially confirms is, since in the early days of the rebellion, the rebel base was constantly changing and moving from planet to planet, the fact that we see this trailer open on Yavin 4 means that this takes place probably within a month, if not a week, before the beginning of A New Hope.
I have a quick question. How canon was it that the rebel base was moving so much at that time?
It was such a small cell. By the time that Empire Strikes Back entered the timeline, they had founded a more permanent base on Hoth. But at this point in Rogue One and in A New Hope, at that point in the rebellion, it was still a very small cell that was constantly moving. And that's also the fact that it was constantly moving is something that we know from the TV show Star Wars Rebels, which is about a small cell of fighters that eventually become the rebellion. So, but let's
and just so we're clear, Rebels is canon right now. Yes.
Yes. Rebels, the TV show on Disney XD, is canon. We'll talk a little bit more about Rebels later in the trailer. So let's get back to the trailer here.
On your own from the age of 15, reckless, aggressive, and undisciplined.
This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel.
Okay, so the woman at the beginning of that clip was talking about this protagonist, Jin. Is that how it's?
Yes, Jin Erso.
All right,
Erso.
Okay,
British maybe.
But the woman who was talking at the beginning, on your own since the age 15, that was Mon Mothma. And for those of you who don't necessarily know who that is, Mon Mothma is the woman in the original trilogy that's in the white robes and does the sort of briefings for the rebellion. And they got this actress looks just like the actress who played this character in the original trilogy. And apparently this actress who's playing Mon Mothma actually played her in the deleted scenes of Revenge of the Sith. They originally introduced her character back in that movie. I was not aware of that. Had you seen those deleted scenes?
No, I had no idea. That's crazy. Another thing to note is that she's one of the few female characters in those movies that actually has more than a one line.
Yeah, in the original trilogy, it was really her and Princess Leia that kind of carried the weight, which is sad because most people didn't even know. I mean, you could identify visually who Mon Mothma was, but I mean, if I said Mon Mothma, most people wouldn't know who that character is. But I'm excited to see more of her because she was one of two female characters, really, in the original trilogy at all.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about sort of what Jin is actually saying here. It's sort of a Suicide Squad moment. You know, when from the trailer when Harley Quinn breaks and gets a purse out of a store or something and says, "Oh, we're bad guys. That's what we do." That's really what this felt like to me. Jin Erso is just sort of coming out and saying, "Hey, we're rebels. So shouldn't we all be unruly ruffians, sort of?"
Are we angst yet? Yeah.
It's what it feels like. It's sort of every character, or at least as far as I can tell, every protagonist is, "Oh, look, I'm this angsty character, I rebel," and now probably later on she's going to be like, "Oh, but there's only one person we can trust to get the job done. It'll be that one person we didn't trust to get any job done because they kept rebelling against us."
Now, it is at this point that I remind Matt that this is indeed a teaser trailer, and while we can speculate and infer quite a bit, we don't necessarily know much yet.
This is true, but so far it really feels like the character of Jin Erso is just fitting that stereotype to the T.
Let's continue on in the trailer and see where this goes.
We have a mission for you. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know what it is and how to destroy it.
Okay, so visually, what you just missed was there's this great shot of a Star Destroyer moving away from what you can tell. You can pretty much tell or infer within a few seconds is the Death Star, but in the background, there's this sort of shadow that's moving across the background. And the very first time that I saw this trailer, I was really worried because I thought that they were introducing the fact that the Death Star had a cloaking device, which did not exist in the original trilogy. But in the very next shot, what we see is the disc on the Death Star that the lasers come out of that can destroy planets. That disc is being sort of lowered into the rest of the orb that is the Death Star. So what we're seeing is the shadow that's casting as it's being installed into the Death Star itself. So what we're seeing is the Death Star essentially assembled before our eyes as a viewer. And the greatest thing, I mean, that's a really cool shot, but the thing that really leapt out of the trailer for me personally was the specific model that they were using for the Star Destroyer. Now, this is very, very hardcore in terms of Star Wars knowledge, but the Star Destroyer that we just saw in this shot of the trailer is a Star Destroyer of the Imperial 1 class. And the reason that I can tell that that's what that is, or the reason that people can tell what that is if you look at the command bridge on the Star Destroyer, it looks like sort of a flat table with an X in terms of the X underneath it is sort of the beams that are connecting it to the rest of the Star Destroyer. And that's what the Star Destroyers looked like in A New Hope. By the time The Empire Strikes Back was released, they had changed the model for the Star Destroyer so that the command bridge just sort of looked like a normal table in that it was flat, and then the beams connecting it went straight down perpendicular to the actual command center room, went straight down into the rest of the Star Destroyer. So essentially what I'm getting at is it shows just how much attention to detail is being paid in making this look like it takes place in the same time period and roughly before A New Hope.
I would say that, or at least what I take from that is just that they're doing the same amount of effort in trying to keep it as faithful to the original trilogy as they did with The Force Awakens, trying to get sort of the shots right, trying to make sure that they use CGI as minimally as possible, and again, trying to get the models right. So I think that's very good.
Yeah. Well, essentially, what I'm getting at with that is, I mean, yeah, I think it's cool, and I just wanted to do a little bit of a shout out. But I think the bigger takeaway is that, yeah, I think they're going about doing this what I would say is they're going about doing this the right way, and I'm very excited because I really think that their heads are in the right place going in making this, because the attention to detail and the amount of reverence that I assume having this detail in there that they're paying toward the original trilogy really, I think, bodes well. So let's go back to the trailer.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Matt knows this because we both watched the trailer a little bit before coming here to talk about it on the radio. My absolute favorite part of this trailer is the fact that siren, that alarm going on in the background is the sound effect, is the sound bite of what alarms sound like in the Star Wars universe. It was used on the Death Star in the original trilogy. It was used on Mustafar in Revenge of the Sith when the lava is getting on the machinery. The fact that they use that as opposed to explosions or some sort of bass electronic sound in the background, the fact that they use that soundbite to sort of use as a metronome to set the pace of the rest of the trailer, the fact that they use that is beyond cool to me.
To me, it mostly just sounded like a generic alarm soundbite to try to give the characters some type of a call to action in the trailer.
Did you recognize the soundbite?
I did recognize it. I did not know that it was used exclusively in those places. But
well, it's that is recognizably a Star Wars alarm. I mean, in this specific trailer, it's a little faster and it's a little higher pitched than what it was in the actual movies. But, I mean, I recognized it right away as, yes, that is the alarm on the Death Star. And that's so cool because that's where a lot of this movie is theoretically going to take place, is on the Death Star. They're going to be stealing the Death Star plans.
Yeah, and once the alarm started going off, you could see all sorts of presumably pilots running through the Rebel base for some purpose. Presumably something went wrong, is what I would guess.
Mm-hmm. And the shot that happened just before we paused, and there's a lot of discussion in the Star Wars community. The shot that we just saw was of a man in a white uniform that is on the bridge of the Death Star, sort of reminiscent of Tarkin in A New Hope, because it is the same command bridge on the Death Star, and there's a lot of people talking about who this person is. A lot of people think that this is going to be, for the most part, one of the, if not the main antagonist, a big main antagonist. But then there's a lot of people arguing, okay, so who is this? Who is this? And a lot of people are arguing that this might be either Thrawn or the new canon's equivalent of Thrawn. Now, Matt, are you familiar with that character in the Star Wars EU?
I can't say I am.
Okay, so before Force Awakens came by and told us what really happened after Return of the Jedi, what a lot of people considered before it became Legends under the Disney ownership, a lot of people considered canon the Thrawn trilogy to be what happened after the original trilogy. The Thrawn trilogy was a trilogy of books that took place after Return of the Jedi and surrounded I'm going to mess up his rank, like a Grand Admiral or something. Grand Admiral Thrawn, who worked for the Empire and sort of essentially was a big leader, a big force in the Empire post Return of the Jedi. Now that said, and again, I don't remember what alien species he is in Legends, but he's not human. And in this trailer, he is human. In Legends and in the non-canon, he's a blue alien with red eyes. So I don't think that this is Thrawn literally exactly, but I would be willing to bet that there's going to be a lot of parallels between the Thrawn character in the EU and whoever this character ends up being in the Rogue movie.
Speaking of parallels, so this is the second movie in a trilogy, and Empire Strikes Back was the second movie in a trilogy, and each one seemed to have some type of a rebel base being raided.
Hold on, I'm confused. Are you saying that Rogue One is the second movie of a trilogy?
Sort of. I realize that obviously it's not going to be, but it is the second movie that's coming out.
It is the second movie of the new Disney-owned Star Wars, yes. But just so we don't confuse people, this is not Episode 8. This is not the continuation of the adventures of Finn and Rey. This is a complete spin-off movie. So this isn't launching any sort of series. This story is going to be largely self-contained, just so that we don't confuse people.
Well, or maybe they're going to start a new trilogy that happens once every couple of years. Anyway, but it feels like they're trying to do the same thing they did in Empire Strikes Back, where it's going to be, oh look, there's a rebel base. All right. Oh look, there's some characters in the rebel base, and now it's going to get raided by the Empire, or I guess. I don't know. It'll actually still be the Empire. It'll be the same thing each time. I
see what you're saying, though, in that there could be a lot of parallels. But going into this, we were told that this movie was going to be decidedly darker. It would focus more on the moral gray as opposed to moral absolutes that Star Wars trilogies love. But I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Let's continue with the trailer here, and then we can talk more about broader speculation about Rogue One.
What will you do when they catch you? What will you do if they break you?
Okay, so there is a lot of stuff going on. That was Forrest Whitaker's character delivering those lines. And there's lots of explosions going on. There was a man with some sort of staff or sword-looking object. A lot of people are wondering if it's a vibro blade, which is another weapon in the EU that's used a lot other than lightsabers. But just in general, there's a lot of very fast images and shots going past the viewer's eyes. And I mean, to me, I'm already getting the feel that this is going to be very different from Force Awakens. And to me, this looks, it looks very much like a departure. It looks much more like a war movie than an adventure movie, which is what was essentially pitched by the filmmakers when they announced that there were going to be these anthology movies, that they were deliberately supposed to be very different in tone and in, what exactly they're trying to convey. And I think that's getting across. Where do you come down on that, Matt?
I completely disagree, I think, on every level. To me, it really just looked like an action movie. It looked like a generic action movie. There were explosions. There were people running from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. There were more explosions. There were various fight sequences. It really just felt like it was going to be a generic action movie, one where moral gray doesn't really come into it. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't feel like, or at least it really looks like it's just going to be a pretty black and white action movie. We're good, they're bad. Let's just fight them down and then take their stuff, as far as I can tell.
All right, let's play the rest of the trailer and see where this ends up.
If you continue to fight, what will you become?
Out in December. So that was the trailer. Those dual laser blasts that you could hear toward the end were indeed AT-ATs on what looked like a desert planet. Or not desert in the same sense that Tatooine is desert, but more of a dry
rocky area.
Dry, rocky area, yeah. And yeah, that concludes the trailer there. The one last sort of general piece of speculation about something specifically in the trailer was that there are lots and lots of shots that took place, cinematic shots, not bullet shots, shots that took place on, like we said, this sort of rocky, drier looking planet, but then also what looked arguably, I could say, like the same planet, but more in the city. It's pretty washed out in terms of colors. There's some market stalls and what have you. And again, this is, of course, speculation that is probably completely going to be wrong. But as of right now, as someone who has watched the Star Wars Rebels TV show, I am predicting that a lot of this movie is going to take place on the planet Lothal, which is where the entirety of the first season of Rebels takes place. But it looks to be a very, very, very similar setting in terms of Lothal. It's a drier, more arid planet, and there's a city, and that city has a lot of washed out colors and markets that look similar. Just in general, it looks very similar. And knowing that Star Wars Rebels, the TV show, and Rogue One, they both take place between the two trilogies, and they're both about the early stages of what the rebellion looks like in the galaxy, it would not surprise me at all. In fact, I'm, again, predicting that I'm willing to bet that those scenes are on the planet Lothal. And I'm also betting, though, that that's probably going to be the only crossover that we see between the two, because the people at Rebels have taken a lot of pride and have put a lot of time and effort into making unique characters that I think they're going to want to keep in their own setting, in their own TV show, and not want character cameos. But I think I don't know if this would still be considered a cameo, but I think it's completely reasonable that we're going to see Lothal as a similar setting between the two.
I think you're probably right. I'd imagine that whatever they can do to try to tie in as many series as possible will help them boost ticket sales. So I'd be willing to bet they're going to have at least a few cameos in there.
All right. So we were talking a little bit earlier, Matt, about what exactly we think this movie is going to be, what it's going to feel like when it eventually comes out. So you're thinking that this is going to be a familiar sort of retread in terms of cinematic style and tone as Force Awakens?
Yeah, when I was watching the trailer, the camera shots specifically looked very similar to that of Force Awakens. There were many grays, usually. There's sort of a gray overlay on the screen like there was in Force Awakens. The colors were largely the same. The tracking shots were largely the same. Really, just overall, it felt like it was going to be a very similar picture, at least cinematically.
So in terms of cinematography and the way that the shots are shot, you think that that's very similar. But, I mean, what about color? Because Force Awakens, obviously, okay, and to be clear, we've already done some spoiling. We're probably just going. We haven't spoiled anything in Force Awakens yet, but I think it's pretty crucial that we do, especially since Force Awakens in our second hour is something that we're going to talk about quite a bit. So to be clear, in this broadcast, we're going to be spoiling
Star Wars, basically all of Star Wars.
The first 7 movies of Star Wars. Just be warned. Okay, that said, so. Star Wars Force Awakens, other than the first act, which takes place on Jakku, other than that, it is a very colorful film. And I don't really see that sort of color or vivid color. I don't see that very much in this trailer.
There were or at least when I remember watching Force Awakens, there were only, I think, 2 colors that really they ever used in any great effect, and that was red and blue, which makes a lot of sense. But when I think of Force Awakens, I always think of that final scene, the fight in the snow, and that is a very muted scene except for those 2 colors. And in the same way, it felt like this recent trailer was fairly muted in terms of color.
Even that final segment where they're fighting in the woods, I would say that it has more color because it's the snow and the fact that the sun just died, so there's very little light on the snow. That's a very, very deep blue, which is different than a very, very deep gray, I feel. So even that segment in Force Awakens, I think, while yes, it's more similar in that there are indeed less colors, I still feel as though this is very different to me. In terms of color palette, most everything I've seen in this trailer that we've just sort of reviewed and talked about a little bit, to me, I feel looks much more like. Feels much more like it's more grounded. I mean, there's the fact that we didn't see a single lightsaber in the entire trailer, in addition to the fact that we didn't necessarily see any Force users in this either. I mean, it's entirely possible that any of these characters are indeed Force users, but if they are, they didn't use that to any sort of effect. They didn't use those powers, and again, in the realm of speculation, I don't think any of them are Force users, and I don't really want any of them to be, because I want this movie to be more grounded and be more about the real people and the sort of bring it down to a human level about the people who work behind the scenes at the rebellion. As opposed to this grand space opera about Skywalker and the Skywalker family. I really like the fact that this seems to really be bringing the Star Wars universe to a more human level.
You really want this to be a war movie. I'm tempted to say that you're probably going to be disappointed.
It was, okay, to be fair, we were told and we were pitched that is what it was going to be. And I feel as though in this trailer, I mean, I don't feel as though that's not the case. I feel as though that is the case.
I feel very differently about that. But I agree absolutely that there should be no Force users in this movie. There just isn't any reason that there would be. At this time, there shouldn't be any other ones that would appear here. I mean, wasn't there some speculation that Vader might at some point show up in this, though?
That's been either confirmed or all but confirmed that Vader will be having at least a cameo.
Right, so I think that would be the only time that any Force user should show up, because at this time, really, there only are 3 that we know of that were using the Force at this time?
There are a few more in Rebels, but yeah, the Jedi are all but disappeared at this point. I mean, behind the scenes, and this is talking a little bit about the TV show Rebels. We know that the Inquisitors are a thing that the Empire is employing to hunt down the remaining Jedi, and then also, by extent, the remaining Force users. But by and large, just about all Jedi and Force users are completely gone from the universe, especially at this point in time, because Rebels does take place probably about a few years before Rogue One is set to take place, so there is going to be a little bit of a gap. They don't take place at exactly the same time. So it's entirely possible that, yeah, you could count the number of Force users on just two hands by the time that Rogue One is going to take place.
Right, and I'm really excited to see a Star Wars movie without Force users. I never thought I would, but there's so many good characters that were not Force users that just sort of got thrown to the wayside a lot of the time during the Star Wars films just because, I don't know, they didn't have the superpower. So I think it'll be really cool to see sort of the little people again.
One of the biggest reasons that I am excited for Rogue One is I feel as though it almost feels like something that would be a book that would be published in the EU is now being adapted into a movie. Obviously, that is not the case. This is it's not based on any book in the EU. They're making an original movie. But that said, the Star Wars universe, the universe that Star Wars takes place in, is a huge place, and there are an infinite number of stories that can be told in that universe. And while even if cinematically this is delivered similarly to A Force Awakens, I feel as though the story it's telling is different enough and interesting enough that even if, you know, at a cinematic level it's similar to Force Awakens, I'd be okay with that, because I think the concept is so cool, because we haven't really seen a story like this told in Star Wars, at least in movie form. What do you think? Do you think that this is going to bring Star Wars to a more human level and kind of show us the narrative of the little or littler people behind the scenes in the rebellion?
Before I saw the trailer, I would have said yes. But unfortunately, I have now seen the trailer, and I am disappointed at the way that they chose to go. What I wanted to see was essentially a group of people that were more or less ordinary attempting to do something extraordinary, which I thought would have been really incredible, because that would have been a war story. It would have been all of these people that were fighting for a cause and trying to somehow defeat this incredibly powerful enemy that has these incredible powers, and do it with their own, their own blue-collar jackets on. But what I ended up seeing was, oh, look, there is one character who happens to be crazy and rebellious, and oh, they're going to be the one that saves us all. And it just feels like the same old story again.
Would you be more okay if Jin is this extraordinary person, what if she's the only one? Because we were sort of pitched again. Before this, we had one official photo of Rogue One, and it was of what is going to be like the main cast. And you had mentioned a little earlier, yeah, it feels a little bit like Suicide Squad in terms of this.
Well, one particular moment, yeah.
Okay, no. But I would say in more than just that, because so I mean, we could talk a little bit about what is Rogue One, and I had assumed and still assume that it's the name of sort of this group of rebels that is more than just Jin. I'm pretty sure that, I'm fairly confident that she is the leader, and if not the leader, at least the one that the character that the audience is supposed to latch onto most as a protagonist. But I don't get the feeling that this is just her story. We've got a ragtag group of rebels that are going to steal these plans. So would you be more okay if she's the only one who's extraordinary and the rest are more of a motley crew or more of a ragtag, roguish group that has just sort of been brought together to do something extraordinary?
So I just looked up the photo that you're talking about, and what it does is it depicts, I think, 6 characters, which presumably are going to be the main crew of whatever Rogue One is, whatever this squadron is, whatever this team is. And one of them is one of the characters from, or 2 of them, I think, at least 2 of them are characters from the trailer itself. And they both seem to be fairly extraordinary people as well. Actually, one of them was seen doing some type of martial art to defeat some soldiers using
the one with the staff. Vibro. I'm hoping that's what it is, because I know what it is and would like that to be canon, but that's just speculation. But yes,
I think that'd be very cool. And yes, I mean, I would be more fine, I guess, if there are more of them. I'd rather that all of them were extraordinary, actually, because I grew up watching the A-Team. And I really love that sort of idea that you have this group of characters that are brought together under a banner and are fighting for justice and all that stuff. I think that's fantastic. I mean, it's the reason why Avengers is selling so well right now. So yes, if there are other characters that are going to be sort of in this squad, I think that'd be fantastic.
But that said, that would lose the sort of concept that we're bringing Star Wars to a more human level.
Well, of course, because it's not a war movie anymore. It's about these 6 people who are in this crew. It's a heist movie. Now, granted, I really, really, really like heist movies, so I think that I'm probably going to enjoy this film. It's just probably not going to be the war movie with less black and white and more grays that we were hoping for originally.
Yeah. That's fair. Do you have any sort of closing statement that you want to issue? If any of the producers or editors of Rogue One are listening, you're in post production. We know you haven't finished the film, so if you're listening, is there anything, Matt, that you would like to say to them?
If you can find a way to take away all of the powers that these characters have and all of the cool parts of them and make them all seem very human and sort of very much fallible, I think that'd be pretty cool. It's been a while since I've seen a movie where all of the characters that are heroes are actually just sort of normal people that don't have any of these superpowers.
Okay. And, oh man, okay, now it's my turn. I guess if any of you are listening out there who have any sort of power about what Star Wars Rogue One is going to end up looking like, I think you're doing fine. Contrary to what Matt has said up to this point, the only complaint that I have over the trailer is with the writing of the line, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it's essentially, "This is a rebellion. I rebel." It's a little subpar, that line, but other than that, I think this is fine.
From that, I plan to extrapolate that the entire movie's writing is awful. And just a quick note too, if those writers are still, if they're still listening, I think that they're probably going to make a good movie. I just don't think that it's the movie that they've led us to believe it's going to be.
That's fair. All right. So our other piece of news is, okay, so about a month ago, a team of I guess Star Wars enthusiasts calling themselves Team -1, they released onto the interwebs what was essentially a homemade scan of what was one of the original what do you call it, film reels?
Yeah.
Of Star Wars before it was A New Hope, the original Star Wars movie, and they released that online, and that kind of made me think the fact that there's the special editions that have been released by George Lucas, where with every succeeding format on to which movies and media can be released, George Lucas, or not necessarily explicitly him, but people at Lucasfilm have edited the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy to some extent and made changes to the film in terms of adding CGI or completely adding scenes or changing shots. So there are very few ways that you can watch what was originally released to theaters as Star Wars. So what Team Negative One released, Star Wars, what are they calling it?
The Silver Screen Edition.
Silver Screen Edition is one of the few ways, if not one of the only and best ways, to see Star Wars. But there are other ways to see Star Wars. So Matt and I have sort of compiled a list of what are some of our favorite fan edits and ways in which you can watch Star Wars. So Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about our first one here, and that is Star Wars the Despecialized Edition.
All right, Despecialized Edition. Just a quick fact before that. James and I actually separately found out about the Despecialized Editions and got them. And then one night, James came up to me and was talking about, oh my goodness, I found this crazy thing called the Despecialized Editions. And I was like, oh, someone else knows about it. Anyway.
And now we're going to share our wisdom with all of you.
All right, so the Star Wars Despecialized Editions were a fan project done originally by someone online named Harmy. Now this person, who now has a very special place in my heart, attempted to essentially take out all of the special effects that George Lucas had put into Star Wars with all of the new editions that he released. Even though Star Wars itself was released in 1977, there was a later edition with some special effects added in, I believe, 1993, and then later on the DVD edition in 2004, and then in the Blu-ray edition in 2011. Now, Harmy had a lofty goal. He wanted to create Star Wars, the original trilogy, but he wanted to make it Blu-ray quality, but somehow take out all of those special effects. So he sent out a cry along the internet and said, hey, does anybody have a copy of the film reels? Can anyone get me as much footage as they can of the originals? And then he managed to upscale that and use it with the new Blu-ray editions to try to compile it down into a fully Blu-ray quality version of the original trilogy without special effects.
Yeah, so one of the big differences between Team Negative One's Silver Screen Edition and the Star Wars Despecialized, first of all, the two of them actually, Harmy and Team Negative One, did some collaboration, and the Despecialized Edition uses a lot of Team Negative One's work. The biggest difference is that the Silver Screen Edition that Team Negative One released is, I guess you could argue, more of the purest. That is exactly frame for frame without any sort of editing, other than just to get rid of grime and what have you that were on the frames. That is exactly what was released into theaters. Whereas Harmy, what he's doing is he's using a variety of sources, including the latest Blu-ray release of the original trilogy, the 2004 DVD release of the original theatrical release, but was of a lower quality, and still frame and models, and is compiling from literally hundreds of sources to create what is essentially the highest definition and highest quality rendition of the original theatrical releases of the original trilogy, and that's how they're a little different.
However, Harmy has said himself that he actually prefers the Silver Screen Edition to his own version, which I thought was very humbling. Very humbling for him to say something like that, even though he had worked so hard on creating this thing, which was as close as he could make it to what he was trying to create.
Mm-hmm. So another fan edit that I would like to talk about is the project called Star Wars Revisited. Now, this is a little different, and it's probably the least, quote, for purists in terms of what this crew has done, and this is still very much a work in progress, is they are going back and essentially trying to make specifically the original trilogy, but they do plan to work with the prequel trilogy as well, to make Star Wars the perfect movie. And what I mean by that is any sort of technical goofs they're going to try and edit out. Probably the best example of this is they completely redid and recast the prop of Han Solo in carbonite for the end of Empire Strikes Back and for Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. They completely recast that and remade that prop so it could be more accurate to the costume that Harrison Ford was wearing in the scene in Empire Strikes Back in which he is frozen in carbonite. And they've made, for Star Wars Revisited, they've made new matte paintings, they've made new scale props, but they're also doing some editing to make the universe that is seen in the cinematography more similar to the universe that is established in the lore of the universe itself. So they've changed the look of some of the computer screens. There are shots of artillery being fired on the Death Star, and the lasers that they're shooting are green, but the light effect on the people that are shooting them in the original release is white, and in Star Wars Revisited, they've changed that flashing light so that it has a green effect to be more in line with the universe that is established. So it's not quite as much for purists, but what they're trying to do is not necessarily do any sort of restoration, but just making Star Wars into the best movies that they can be is sort of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, if we're talking about lofty goals, attempting to reshoot missed props and angles like that, that is one heck of a project that I will be very surprised if it ever gets finished.
Yeah. I would say, yes, it's definitely one of the most labor-intensive projects that I've heard of. And the last one that we're going to talk about is a little bit more in line with what people would normally associate with being called a fan edit. These, what we're pitching are a trilogy, a re-editing of the prequel trilogy by internet user... I don't really know if there's a way to say this. It's spelled...
Latewort.
Latewort? All right, by internet user Latewort. And this person released these fan edits to be... I'm trying to think how to say this. These fan edits...
To fix them because they're terrible.
Okay. I was trying to say it a little nicer than that. Hate... On the prequel trilogy aside, there are some huge problems with the prequel trilogy. So what Latewort tried to do, and the reason that we're bringing these up is because these prequel fan edits have actually been endorsed to accompany the despecialized editions if you're going to watch all 6 movies, is they essentially try and make the tone and the ideas that are being conveyed in the prequel trilogy more similar to those in the original trilogy, and essentially make the prequel trilogy better to serve the original trilogy. So what's an example of that? All right, so they edit out in Revenge of the Sith when Darth Sidious, Palpatine, gives Anakin the name of Darth Vader. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. I'm saying this wrong. What they've done is they've made it so that Darth is not a prefix for a Sith Lord. They've edited it so that the only person who has Darth in their name is Darth Vader. So they've taken away the name Darth Tyrannus for Count Dooku, and he's referred simply to as Count Dooku because Latewort didn't like the fact that after the original trilogy and in the makings of the prequel trilogy, didn't like the fact that Darth suddenly became a prefix for the title, or a title for a Sith, because in the original trilogy it really just was a part of Vader's name.
Something that's a little more tangible, that's a change that they made, is they just got rid of midichlorians because they were one of the parts of the original trilogy, or of the prequels, that really didn't seem to fit in line with anything in the original trilogy. So the fan edits completely eliminate that plot entirely, which is excellent.
So a lot of these are some of the better fan edits that I've seen of the prequel trilogy, and the reason that we're talking about them is because they're sort of quote made to go along with the original trilogy. They trim out a lot of the fluff and stuff that made the prequel trilogy bad.
Jar Jar.
Yeah. So it salvages what it can of the prequel trilogy, and that's why we were talking to you about them. So this about wraps up our first hour of the show. When we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit about the pros and cons of the changes that were made to subsequent special editions of the Star Wars saga. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about The Force Awakens and the future of the Star Wars franchise. So, this has been Gaming Society Radio on WMCN 91.7 Mac Radio. I'm your co-host, James.
And I'm Matthew.
And we'll talk to you again in a bit. And we're back with Gaming Society Radio. I'm co-host James.
And I'm Matthew.
And as promised, we're going to talk a little bit about some specific changes in the controversial Star Wars special editions. First, we're going to talk about some ones that we weren't quite as on board with. And I think we've got to start with
the rallying cry.
Han shot first.
Every single time that anyone brings up bad changes in the specialized editions, this is always the number one most talked about problem. Now, for those of you who do not know, in the original trilogy, before it was re-edited, in that scene with Han and Greedo in A New Hope, Han shoots Greedo first. And however, in the specialized editions, in the more recent editions, Greedo completely misses Han by well over several feet, and then Han later shoots him back.
Quite possibly Greedo being the worst shot of any bounty hunter in the entire galaxy. Almost at point blank range.
Yeah, one of the most... he's supposed to be a professional bounty hunter, and he completely misses a shot from that distance.
Yeah. Now I'm not going to want to play as him in the Outer Rim expansion pack of Star Wars Battlefront.
Him and Nien Nub.
Nien Nub. Luckily, Nien Nub wasn't nerfed in any sort of edit that I know of. But yes, okay. So yeah, I think probably one of the biggest reasons that this change was so controversial is that the introduction of Han Solo in Star Wars and New Hope is one of the coolest character introductions ever, because in one scene it was established that he was just a total and complete badass who shot first and asked questions later. The fact that it was basically unprovoked that he shot Greedo in the original theatrical release was so defining. I mean, Han Solo almost created an entirely new genre of character, because I describe a lot of characters as, oh, well, they're just a total Han Solo.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think a big part of that is the fact that his character was written so well, including and especially his introduction to the franchise, which has been sort of dragged through the mud with the fact that this change has introduced that, in one of the cuts, one of the older cuts, Greedo shoots first and Han reacts. In the newest cut of the most recently released Blu-rays of the original trilogy, they shoot at the exact same time, essentially. If there's any difference, it's a frame or two. So it's essentially the same time. Greedo still shoots, though, and misses. So, I mean, I think this change detracts from Han Solo's character, but then also Greedo's character. I mean, I care much more about Han Solo, but I mean, Greedo has so little screen time, but we still care about him because he was a part of this really cool introduction, and now it's just it sucks.
Right. I would say that Han Solo at that moment defined sort of this rogue character that really only was in it for the money, which he kept. He kept that character all the way through the first movie and part of the second movie. He did a fantastic job. He really, really just didn't want to be there. And that was excellent. That was so cool that you had this hero who really just didn't want to be a hero, but he was sort of forced into this situation. That was fantastic. But he became this sort of more redeemable character when he was just the one who, he shot at me? Well, I guess I'll shoot back. Now, one thing that I do want to say is that I believe George Lucas actually went on record saying that in that original shot, in the original trilogy, without any of the edits, Greedo actually did shoot at the same time. And it just doesn't appear that way because of how it was edited in terms of the film room. But it actually was supposed to be that they shot at the same time. And if you listen to the sound effect, you can kind of almost maybe hear what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. So it is possible that was what he intended to do. But by not doing that, he ended up with a character that was way cooler.
Yep. There's a whole host of changes that happen in the minutes leading up to this, and that is the entrance into Mos Eisley, where the cantina is, but then just sort of coming in on Luke's hover vehicle, there are introduced shot after shot of really just poorly rendered CGI creatures that have been added. That there are new shots with really bad juvenile humor, more akin to the prequel trilogy. There's really poorly rendered CGI characters or CGI creatures that are in shots that existed in the original cut but are completely obscuring the screen, and it takes you out of watching this so much, especially if you're more familiar with editions that don't have these creatures, because it's so bad and it's so overt, and you can't just sort of ignore it because it literally blocks the entire screen in some of these shots.
Yeah, I think he just thought the world wasn't populated enough, and so he was like, hey, let's just add in all of these random CGI characters that'll somehow fill it up with life. But honestly, having seen the shots without them, it looked like a better movie before those aliens were sort of put in. Because yeah, there's one moment where this big dinosaur thing walks straight across the screen and blocks everything. I don't know what the purpose of that was.
Yeah, and I mean, Mos Eisley is, I think, by far has a lot of the most controversial and just some of the worst cuts, because the two changes that we've talked about are all within about 10, 15 minutes of each other. And so is this next one. This is the only time that an entire scene has been added to what is now canon. And that is, there's a scene in which Han meets up with a CGI rendition of Jabba the Hutt and essentially asks for more time. Now, the original time that this change was introduced, there was a very, very just absolutely terrible CGI rendition of Jabba. They've changed that in subsequent edits, and the CGI looks passable. That's not my big complaint with this change. I mean, if they're going to have a CGI Jabba, the CGI looks fine. But my biggest complaint is, I mean, everyone that knows what Star Wars is, for the most part, knows who and what Jabba the Hutt is. But there was a time where we had no idea what Jabba the Hutt was, or who he was, what he looked like, and he was just sort of this nebulous, nefarious criminal. And I've got to think that there are going to be future generations of people who are going to be introduced to Jabba the Hutt, and this, having him in A New Hope in Star Wars ruins the reveal and ruins the effect that he has in Return of the Jedi, when the original theatrical cut, that was the first time that we got to see him. And the scene, while it looks fine, I feel, it completely undermines a huge part of what made Jabba the Hutt so cool in the Return of the Jedi, in that he was just this larger-than-life space slug in this huge mansion, and that is so much just a better introduction to that character.
Do you know the story behind that particular scene?
No, I'm really curious.
All right, so they actually did shoot that scene back when the movie was made in 1977. And they shot it with, I believe, a large Irish man in a fur coat.
Oh, you know what? I had heard of this because they didn't know who Jabba the Hutt was going to be, and at that time, they had him just played by a large human.
Right. And so they filmed it like that, and they weren't sure, and that he just sort of was there as a placeholder. They were planning on putting some type of claymation, presumably, around him, and that was going to be fine, because claymation was just all the rage at that time. You can see it in the despecialized version of Empire Strikes Back. It's pretty glorious. But they unfortunately did not have the time or the budget to put that in, and so they just cut the scene entirely. So if you do watch those despecialized editions or silver screen editions, that scene is just not there at all. It's a deleted scene, got left on the cutting room floor. But for some reason, George Lucas then thought, hey, now that we have the resources to do this, we have the technology to do CGI, let's try it out. Let's see what the scene will look like. And so he edited that in, including sort of leaping Han up in order to jump over the slug, which is really, really glitchy looking and kind of awful, but it was there. But I completely agree with you, James. Like, every way, I think it's a terrible introduction for him. I think, especially with the, I believe, 1993 edition of it, where Jabba's eyes are huge and cross-eyed and hideous looking, so I apologize to whichever generation had to see that as their first Jabba.
Yeah, what ended up happening is the reason that the CGI looked better is they redid it with the model that they had in The Phantom Menace, because Jabba the Hutt is in The Phantom Menace, and they superimposed that model of Jabba, which looks much better, and is coincidentally not in Latewert's edit of The Phantom Menace. He has been cut out so that the reveal of who Jabba the Hutt is what you have to wait until 6 movies to see what he looks like.
Not only that, but it doesn't make much sense for Jabba to be there at that particular time.
It was more of a cameo. Yeah, that's a little tangential. So why don't you talk about Vader's...
Vader's no? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah, I can do that one. In The Return of the Jedi, that moment at the very end of the film, it's this fantastic, just this beautiful moment. Luke is on the ground being zapped by Sidious. Everything is fantastic. And Vader, picks him up and throws him down the pit, and that's amazing, right? Absolutely incredible moment. Now, in the original trilogy, that's a silent moment for Vader. Vader sort of looks over, looks back, looks over, looks back, and you can feel sort of this pain inside of him, and then he picks up Darth Sidious without a word and just throws him down without saying anything. Unfortunately, George Lucas thought that subtlety was a very poor technique in filmmaking, and so he decided to have Vader say the phrase "no," and then repeat it with "no" as he actually threw Sidious over, to sort of drive the point home, which takes sort of this brilliant shot, this brilliant moment, this internal struggle that you can see on the screen, and turns it into sort of this laughable moment, which then gets even worse when you notice that in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke's hand gets cut off and he's like, "No!" They actually took Vader's scream from Return of the Jedi that they added in and edited that in as that scream, and you can listen for that next time that you watch.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the scream itself sounds that bad, but the fact that it is there and it just sort of removes any sort of subtlety of emotion in that exchange. That I can't argue with the fact that it ruins the subtlety. And then sort of the last little edit here before Matt and I start talking about what are subjectively some changes we're okay with, but this one we're not.
Oh goodness!
Is
no.
The CGI Max Rebo band in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. First of all, I'm fairly certain it's a completely new song, first of all.
That's right. The new song is, I believe, called Jedi Rocks.
Yes, so they changed the song that the Max Rebo band play, but then also they changed, originally it was hand puppets, it wasn't CGI, but in the new special edition, this band that was originally puppets are now CGI nightmares.
Yeah.
That are...
There's a tiny gopher
Wow.
that throws his throat up against you. It's a little graphic.
It's intense, and it's weird, and it's... Oh, man. It's... oh, man. It's just... It's so egregious, and it's something I can't even really think how to describe it other than it's just a lot and it's bad, and I think you really just have to watch it.
Yeah, they just put a music video in.
Yeah, or don't watch it actually.
Yeah, I don't know why, but they decided that they wanted to put a music video into Star Wars, and they reshot all of that, and they edited in the CGI, and they got a new song for it. Originally, it was this sort of muted club atmosphere, actually, with the song Lapti Neck. The song, not that great. I'm kind of fine that the song went away, but it was just this very muted thing. It was sort of this atmosphere where you could hear the person singing in the background, but that wasn't the main focus. The main focus was sort of this slave girl that was dancing.
I would argue that I actually do prefer the original song better because what did you say? What did you say it was called?
Laptinek?
Okay, that and the words of the original song. I mean, and the words in the original song and the words in the new song. Neither of them are English, but at least in the original song, it actually sounds more, to me personally, this is my opinion, sounds more like an alien language, whereas the newer song just the language that they're using, it doesn't have as much nuance, and it sounds much more just like baby speak.
Sure, I'll give that to you, yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to get into some changes that either Matt or myself or both of us feel were more sensible and are actually more okay with. So when I think of changes that I am more okay with, one of the biggest ones that I think of are in Empire Strikes Back. They have introduced windows to Cloud City. And in the original cut, in the theatrical release of Empire Strikes Back, there's a lot of white halls, but it feels very closed off, which to me feels inconsistent with the fact that they're in this beautiful, beautiful Cloud City. And in the newest special editions, there are, where they're originally just blank white panels on the wall, they've added shots as though, like you're looking through a window of just vistas and just a beautiful open expanse that feels more like I am in a city in the clouds, and it really opens it up, and that's why I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'm more of a purist. I really enjoyed seeing it without the cloud shots personally. When I went back and I watched the despecialized editions, I can understand wanting them in there, and I do think that it definitely added a layer to the fact that it was actually Cloud City and it wasn't just sort of any other place like most of it. But there were so many shots that didn't have windows that it sort of felt like that was where the Star Wars universe existed to me. So it felt like
in a universe with no windows.
It seemed like it. I mean, look. I mean, Death Star didn't have any windows.
That's fair.
There were no windows on anything. There were those tiny little windows. There were like 3 windows on the Millennium Falcon. Like windows just didn't seem to be a thing. So I like the fact that there weren't.
To me, I feel like if any place is going to have windows, though, it's going to be Cloud City.
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely worth it to have windows there.
All right. So this is one that I'm more okay with. Okay. Matt's giving me this incredulous look because he has the list in front of him, as do I, and that is. And this is one of the more controversial ones, so it might be controversial that I'm more okay with it, is at the end, the very, very end of Return of the Jedi, we see Force ghosts of Obi-Wan Kenobi, we see a Force ghost of Yoda, and we see a Force ghost of Anakin Skywalker. Now, in the original theatrical release, the actor Sebastian Shaw, who's this older, little bigger man, showed up as the Force ghost for Anakin for Darth Vader. And it doesn't look like Darth Vader because in the original trilogy, all we really see of Darth Vader is him in his suit, but you're able to infer that that's who it is pretty readily. Now, in the new special editions and in the newest editions of the Blu-rays, Sebastian Shaw has been replaced with Hayden Christensen, who played Anakin Skywalker in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Now, this is something that I am more okay with because I am not so inclined to completely throw out the prequels because I think that the prequels, for as much bad as they do, they have a lot of good in them and a lot of merit to them, and they are considered canon. So, that said, if I look at Star Wars in the scope of a 6-part saga, I am absolutely fine with having Hayden Christensen there as the Force ghost of Anakin Skywalker.
See, but that's not the problem that people have with it, though. There are two problems that people typically have with it. First off, Sebastian Shaw was a fantastic actor, and so essentially just taking him out of the film feels wrong. But the other reason is just Anakin Skywalker is supposed to be significantly older at that point. Hayden Christensen at the time was mid-30s, younger, something like that. Whereas Darth Vader was supposed to be significantly older because, several years had passed at that point. And Sebastian Shaw was actually the actor who played an unmasked Darth Vader. So it would make sense for unmasked Darth Vader to then be what it looked like. And so when instead you get this sort of young character, it ends up sort of feeling a little anachronistic. Mm-hmm. Which is one problem. Another issue that I personally have that this is less valid, but I just really hated Hayden Christensen's portrayal of Anakin Skywalker. I thought it was absolutely abysmal. I thought his line readings were terrible, and his character was awful.
I would counter, and this is tangential, so we shouldn't spend too much time on it. I would counter that how good of an acting job could you do with such poor writing?
I hate sand.
That's my counter. But
it's
that's not here or there.
It's everywhere.
My sort of excuse for why is Hayden Christensen there is that that was sort of the last state. Other than the redemption at the end, Hayden Christensen was the last state at which Anakin Skywalker was still Anakin Skywalker. Because the Sith go through this thing, and we see it in Force Awakens, where it's sort of similar to dead naming, where when you become a Sith, you become an entirely different person and leave behind the life that you used to live. Because Kylo Ren talks about Ben Solo as though that is not who he is anymore. He is a different person. Therefore, Darth Vader, because he became a Sith, sort of does this dead naming thing where he is not Anakin Skywalker. He is Darth Vader. So if someone's going to come back, obviously Darth Vader wouldn't come back because Sith don't have the ability to become Force ghosts. That's a Jedi exclusive thing in terms of the Force. And that was the last state at which Anakin Skywalker was Anakin Skywalker and not Darth Vader.
I can understand that, except, in my opinion, he essentially went back to being Anakin Skywalker at the very end, which is why he became a Force ghost at all. Otherwise, he obviously couldn't have.
Yep.
That's just, but yeah.
That's fair. These are all opinions. All right, so this next one is about the prequels. Now, the prequels have some changes. They don't have nearly as many changes as the original trilogy. They also don't have nearly as controversial of changes because, let's be honest, people seem to like the original trilogy more and have the nostalgia for it. So one of the probably the biggest change across the entire prequel trilogy is when Phantom Menace originally released to theaters, Yoda was a puppet, and now in the new releases of Phantom Menace, he's been replaced with CGI. Now, when it was just Phantom Menace and we hadn't seen Attack of the Clones and we hadn't seen Revenge of the Sith, I'm fine with having Yoda as a puppet because that is what Yoda is in the original trilogy. But in the scope of if you just take a look at the 3 prequels, I think it makes sense for him to be CGI in A Phantom Menace because he absolutely needed to be CGI in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith because they wouldn't be able to have the lightsaber battles that Yoda had in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith if he was a puppet. Now, first of all, let me just be clear, I don't like the way that the choreography looks of the of the lightsaber battles in the prequel trilogy. It looks like a dance and not an actual duel. Now, that aside, I think in terms of consistency within the prequel trilogy itself, it makes sense for Yoda to be CGI in The Phantom Menace because he absolutely needed to be CGI in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And while I like the look of a puppet Yoda, I think in terms of just consistency, it's best that he's CGI in all 3.
I think that's probably right. For consistency, yes, I think that's probably accurate. I just wish that they didn't have those battles because then they could have left him as a puppet because puppet Yoda is far more adorable and,
yes.
really, really what I wanted to see. Although trying to see puppet Yoda fight against Dooku would have been pretty impressive, I gotta say.
Yeah, I would do that. So we've got time for one more edit before we move on to talk about the future of the franchise here. So Matt, what edit are you going to argue for as being a pretty solid one, or are all the ones on the rest of the list mine?
No, they're mine. I'm gonna go for the less bug-eyed Palpatine.
Ooh, good, because I think I have a dissenting opinion on your opinion.
No way.
Go
That's
ahead.
Interesting. All right. So in Empire Strikes Back, I had no idea until I watched Despecialized, but there's a scene where Darth Vader talks to Palpatine, and in the original trilogy before it was edited, the character of Palpatine was played by I don't remember her name, but it was played by a woman, and then it was superimposed over by the voice of some actor who I can't remember the name of anymore. But then they also like combined the eyes with like a monkey or something. Which created
they had chimpanzee eyes. Now all this is in shadow, but yeah, they had the eyes of a chimpanzee sort of superimposed on this person's
so
face.
Sidious was just super bug-eyed and weird and creepy and awful, and it was very frightening. And then when they cast the part of Sidious or Palpatine for Return of the Jedi, they cast Ian McDiarmid, and then they decided to go back and reshoot that last scene to try to make it have some sort of cohesive nature.
Yeah, and the actor who played the Emperor in Return of the Jedi is the same actor who played the Emperor in the prequel trilogy. So that actor basically is the Emperor. So I do understand why it is that they made this change. I honestly, and this is, all these are opinions. I guess it's my opinion that I don't like the way it looks, in the sense that the original looks much more foreboding, and it's much darker, it's much more shadowy, it's much more sinister looking, whereas in the edit, it's a bright blue. It's very, very crisp, which is in direct juxtaposition with, I think, a lot of just the cinematography in general of Empire Strikes Back. And it's very clear, and it doesn't look as scary, which I think scary is an important part of this performance because of the fact that this, I believe, is the only time that we see the Emperor in Empire Strikes Back. This is the first time that we've even seen the Emperor in the original trilogy. So I feel as though a lot, like just the general feeling of what that exchange between Vader and the Emperor, the dynamics have been just sort of, the nuance has been lost because it's just so crisp and clear, and I don't buy it as much.
I laughed out loud when I saw the face. It was not foreboding to me. To me, it just looked hilarious.
It was to me, it was creepy and shadowy.
What I will say, though, is that the voice of whoever the actor was who originally played it, the voice, in my opinion, sounded better when it was originally done. And there actually was some dialogue changes. For example, in the original, he actually says Luke Skywalker, whereas the new Sidious says young Skywalker. Just sort of that small change that doesn't really make any sense for George Lucas to make, but he made it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, I don't feel as strongly about that one, but that's one that I did prefer the original. So we're going to move on now to our last segment. We're going to talk about the future of the franchise, but not before we do a quick list of speculation associated with Force Awakens. Now, again, we're going to get back into the realm of speculation where a lot of these things may be wrong, but both Matt and I are going to weigh in as, self-proclaimed Star Wars experts. The only reason we get to say that is because we have a radio show about it. So
Because no one else can disagree with us right now.
Yeah, if that means anything, not really. So we're going to do these relatively rapid fire because that makes things interesting because then we have energy. So I'm going to ask a question. So, Matt. Oh, and by the way, we're definitely going to be spoiling The Force Awakens here. So, Matt, who are Rey's parents?
God, maybe, okay, Rogue One's coming out. Okay, so my guess would be, Jin. It's Jin.
That is really interesting.
Main character from Rogue One. It's gotta be. They're gonna have a tie-in from Force Awakens and Rogue One that's gonna be a tie-in to go along with the regular series.
That is something that I had not even considered after having seen the new trailer. Now I'm thinking completely on the fly. They do look similar. I don't think that, but that would be a really interesting tie to The Force Awakens.
I think there would just be such a cool twist, though. I mean, it's sort of this rebel character, but then of course there's the question of how did she get there? How did Rey end up on Jakku? How did this happen? Like, did her parents left at some point, right? So does that mean Rogue One's gonna end with Jin somehow being like left on a planet somewhere? Like, what's gonna go on?
I'll say it's a twist. I mean, there's a lot of room for error because we've only seen one trailer and we might see the movie and there's no possible way that this is true, but that's really interesting and I appreciate that because I hadn't thought of that.
Actually, quick question. What's the movie that's going to come out after Rogue One? The other one?
Episode 8?
Well, no, after that one.
After that one, they've confirmed that it's going to be about Boba Fett.
Okay. Okay, never mind. That probably has no tie-in. All right.
Yep, okay, yes. Okay, so who do I think are Rey's parents? I don't know. I don't presume to know who Rey's parents are, but I am of the opinion that she is of Kenobi lineage. Ooh. And there are a couple of reasons I think this. Obviously, Anakin's lightsaber would be a big deal to her if she was a Skywalker, but let's not discount the fact that Obi-Wan Kenobi trained 2 Skywalkers using that lightsaber, and when he wasn't training them, he was safeguarding that lightsaber for 19 years out in the deserts of Tatooine. So that's the reason that lightsaber is very important to Rey. In the Force vision scene that Rey has in Maz's basement in The Force Awakens, there are a couple of lines from I believe most of them are from the original trilogy. There might be a couple of sound bites from the prequel trilogy, but there's only one line that is heard. You can hear it very faintly at the end of her Force vision that is new and was recorded specifically for The Force Awakens. And the line is, "Rey, these are your first steps." And it's a combination of Alec Guinness. They took a time when Alec Guinness said the word afraid in Star Wars, and they cut it down so that it sounds like Rey. And they brought Ewan McGregor to come back in, who played Obi-Wan Kenobi in the prequels. So now we've got both actors who played Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Ewan McGregor recorded the line, "These are your first steps." So I think it's gotta mean something that the only new line in there is by both Kenobis.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think it would be very cool, but it makes it just sound like it's somebody who Kenobi would have known to me.
That's fair. And just sort of my last thing, and this isn't necessarily proof, but I think is a reason that they might want to have her be related to Obi-Wan, is the fact that this would be the first time, if Luke is indeed going to train Rey, this would be the first time that a Skywalker is the master and a Kenobi is the apprentice.
Well, talking about what that last scene meant, really, we could just do that really quickly. In my opinion, I think there's going to be a new Jedi Order. That's what I think. I think that Luke is going to train a new Jedi Order.
Do you think that it won't be called the Jedi? Do you think it'll be something else, or do you think it'll be a continuation of the old Jedi Order?
I hadn't even considered that as a possibility. What
Because
other name would they go
because
by?
it's not the Sith anymore. It's the Knights of Ren that are sort of the figurehead for the dark side. So that the face of the dark side has changed. So are you arguing that it might not be the Jedi Order anymore, that it might be something else?
That's really cool. Maybe it'll be something like the Knights of Walker or something like that. I think that'd be very cool.
The Knights of Walker.
Not Scott Walker, but the other one.
No, I was gonna say I'm from Wisconsin, so that's the first thing I thought of. So more speculation about identity. Matt, who is Snoke?
Oh my goodness. Andy Serkis, I believe, plays him in the film.
Who in the Star Wars universe do you think is Snoke?
Gosh.
Do you think he's an entirely new character or a
I think
pre-existing
he's
one?
probably going to be pieces of characters. In my opinion, the thing that's closest to that would be Darth Plagueis, right? Because he talks a lot about the whole concept of immortality, and you remember from when Palpatine is trying to convince Anakin to join the dark side. He's like, oh yes, I learned from Plagueis all those things about immortality, and then once he taught me all of them, I killed him. But the question is, how can you kill someone who knows all the secrets to immortality?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So I think it lines up really well. I agree. I think that he's Darth Plagueis. I believe that more than he's a new character. I really do believe that he's Darth Plagueis because he looks very old and wise. And Darth Plagueis was around before even the Phantom Menace, so he's been around for a long time. He supposedly learned the secret of immortality while Palpatine claimed to have killed him. I guess we don't really know. It's been confirmed. The reason that they got Andy Serkis to play Snoke and the reason that Snoke is CGI, and we haven't seen this yet because we didn't really get to see this in Force Awakens, he's not a giant, but he has been confirmed by people who are working behind the scenes. He's 7 feet tall, which lines up with, I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly, but George Lucas said that, and this is debatable whether or not it's still canon, that Darth Plagueis was a Moon, M-U-U-N, alien, and they are generally taller and slimmer, which matches up with the Snoke that we've seen. And I honestly, I do believe that we are seeing Darth Plagueis, because for the most part, The Force Awakens doesn't really reference the prequel trilogy at all, which I'm fine with. But if they're going to do any sort of reference to the prequel trilogy, it wouldn't surprise me if it is that Snoke is Plagueis.
I think that'd be very interesting. The question, of course, would then be, why did he take the name Snoke?
I don't know. I mean, in the prequel trilogy, why did Palpatine decide to call Anakin Darth Vader? I guess we're supposed to believe that it was just off the top of his head.
He just looked like a father at the time.
Yes, I suppose. So, Matt, next question. Is Finn Force sensitive?
Oh, goodness. Yeah? No. I hope not. I really don't want him to be. I think that would be really problematic, personally, for how I think the story's going forward. I really, really, really just don't want him to be Force sensitive, because he's essentially, the Han Solo of the group right now? And so...
what about Oscar Isaac, though?
Oh,
the Han Solo... Okay.
The actual,
underused, yes. But I mean, in terms of who's really the new Han Solo, I would say it's Oscar Isaac. It would be that's the actor, but it would be Poe Dameron.
I mean, that's sort of more of an explicit Han Solo. I meant just sort of like the sort of this character who's relatively reticent at the beginning, and then it sort of ends up sort of gathering up for the team. I think that it would just be less interesting if he's a Force user or Force sensitive or any of those things, because I don't know, he's just kind of this lovable character who's sort of trying to get by. And I mean, he has that awesome scene, with the sword and all that stuff, but like. I really just don't want it to happen. I
agree with that. I think it would be so much cooler if he wasn't Force sensitive, because that would answer the question. I don't know if this was ever a question in your head, but this was definitely a question in my head, is what happens, or what is it like if a non-Force user tries to use a lightsaber? Because the way that lightsabers work, and I could talk probably for 2 hours about lightsabers, but I'm not going to. The way that lightsabers work is they have a button that you can turn them on and off with. So theoretically, a non-Force user could use it, but it's more of a tool, because if you're an actual Force user, you usually don't use the button. It's the lightsaber really is an extension of yourself and a physical manifestation of the power that you wield with the Force. So I've always had the question of what does it look like if a non-Force user tries to use a lightsaber, and I honestly think that is what we saw in A Force Awakens at the very end when Finn goes against Kylo Ren. So I don't think that Finn is Force sensitive, nor do I want him to be.
I mean, at worst, he was just really bad with a lightsaber.
Yep. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the future of Phasma, probably the most overhyped character. I guess you could argue for Poe Dameron, but at least in my case, that was probably the biggest letdown of The Force Awakens was the criminal underuse of Captain Phasma.
So just to say this really quickly, Phasma was the sort of, shiny stormtrooper.
That makes you sound like a Pokemon, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, that was probably the strangest thing going in for me personally. Like, I hadn't read anything about Phasma at the time, but then to see her in that strangely, what was it, chromium armor?
Yeah.
It was very, very strange.
Do you think she's dead?
Because
she has
went
been
to a trash compactor?
Yes. The actress has been confirmed to be in the new movie, but I mean that doesn't mean anything. Plus, I mean, even though it's not J.J. Abrams working on the new movie, I mean, they've lied before to keep things secret. So.
I mean, they went as far as making Mark Hamill sit at the reading table around the first read of Force Awakens.
Yeah, we don't necessarily know anything by the fact that she's returning. Take that with a grain of salt. I don't think she's dead. I think, and I guess more than anything, I really hope and want her to be the new Boba Fett. And to be fair, Boba Fett, unless you watch the special edition with the new scene with Jabba the Hutt, Boba Fett isn't in A New Hope. Boba Fett is only in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So Boba Fett, who's this character that a lot of nerds think is really cool, I think we just need to give Captain Phasma some more time to cook.
I mean, Boba Fett only had 4 lines in the entire film, which actually, after the prequels came out, got then the actor who then originally said those 4 lines, then his lines disappeared, and the actor who played
Jango Fett
actually then re-recorded those lines.
Another change, controversial.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't take much in order to make a character a fan favorite. So I think that Phasma could very easily show up just even briefly, and I think that would be enough.
Plus, I think there's a lot of space for her to have a really good arc because she's sort of portrayed as this really, really stoic person at the First Order, and the fact that she betrayed them, and she's really the reason that they were even able to get to the Starkiller base to destroy it. She could easily become an outcast among the First Order and have a really interesting arc in terms of questioning allegiances and what have you. I think there's a lot of room for her to grow, which is why I really, really hope that she's not dead, and I am open to her being the new Boba Fett.
She's probably just dead.
That would be so lame. Okay. So, what do you think are going to be the love interests going forward?
I mean, isn't it pretty clear? Isn't it going to be Finn and Rey?
I think there's going to be a love triangle.
I mean, isn't there always? I mean, like, who was it who you said was Han Solo? Was it Poe Dameron? So perhaps the love triangle is going to be Poe Dameron, Finn, and Rey?
Okay, well, yes, but I think instead of... All right, so in the original trilogy, the love triangle obviously was, Han and Luke vying for Leia. I don't see people vying for Rey because Oscar Isaac's character Poe Dameron I don't think he interacts with Rey at all, and if he does, it's a very little amount. I think that there is some romantic tension between Poe Dameron and Finn.
Ooh, now that'd be very interesting. So you think that'd be Rey trying to get Finn's attention?
Yes, and as well as Oscar Isaac's character Poe Dameron, and I mean. I think this, a big part of it is very shortly before the movie came out in theaters, the 3 Poe Dameron, Finn, and Rey, their actors were on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And Ellen asked them, so is there any romance in this movie that we should be aware of? And Oscar Isaac said yes. I was, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is him talking. I was playing romance in the scenes that I was with a specific character. I'm not going to say who, but I was definitely playing romance. And John Boyega, who played Finn, agreed with that. Like, yeah, the scenes that I was in, I was definitely playing romance, and I can't say who. And Finn has scenes with both Poe Dameron and Rey, but Poe Dameron, really, what characters other than Finn was he playing with?
I don't think I know the movie well enough. I don't think I know every scene that he was in.
It really was
is just Finn.
It really was just Finn.
There's like no one else.
Yes. I mean, Poe gave Finn his name. Poe gave Finn his jacket. So I think it's entirely possible that there is definitely some romantic interest there. So,
I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I think that would be great. So that is my prediction. All right, why don't you take over this list?
All right. So recently we heard that Frank Oz is signing on. So will we see Yoda coming up in the 8th movie?
I mean, Force ghosts are forever, right? I mean, we don't know.
We're just gonna see more ghosts.
Okay, so Frank Oz is a really talented person who is very talented at voiceover. So I think it's entirely possible that Frank Oz, for those of you who don't know, was the voice actor who played Yoda in the prequel trilogy, in the original trilogy, and in the new Rebels TV show. That's that voice actor. I think it's just as likely that he's going to come back and play Yoda as a Force ghost as he is going to come back and play a different character. Because for what it's worth, Mark Hamill did some voice acting for the Star Wars Clone Wars show, but he didn't play Luke. He played a completely different character. He actually played a Sith, Darth Bane. So just because this person voice acted for Yoda, the Star Wars universe and the media, they don't necessarily have to come back to play the character that they used to because, like I just said, Mark Hamill came back and wasn't playing Luke. So I think it's entirely possible that Frank Oz is coming back and isn't going to play Yoda. I guess we just don't really know enough.
I mean, that certainly is possible. I think it'd be very cool, though, if Yoda came back just for a brief moment and would be a puppet.
First of all, yes. If you're going to bring Yoda back, please, please, please don't make him CGI because he looked fine in Empire Strikes Back and in Return of the Jedi as a puppet. I mean, so unless you're having lots of somersaulty lightsaber nonsense, which a Force ghost should not do, please don't have a Force ghost fighting with a lightsaber. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely. Please, if you're going to bring him back, people who are making Episode 8, if you're listening, please, if you're going to bring Yoda back, make him a puppet.
All right, next question. Why did Kylo Ren turn to the dark side? Or rather, how?
Yes. Well, I think a big part of it is Kylo Ren or Ben Solo identified more with Anakin Skywalker than he did with Luke Skywalker and was really enamored with what it was that Darth Vader was trying to do and trying to accomplish, much more so than any sort of reformation of the Jedi Order. And I think that combined with there has to be some sort of I'm almost certain that there has to be some sort of outside influence from Snoke, but I think Snoke was manipulating real feelings that did exist in terms of, Ben Solo, while he was being trained by Luke, probably, as it was, had some sort of fixation on the concept of Darth Vader, and Snoke just did a little bit of pushing and prodding to get him onto the dark side as a path.
That's interesting. I just sort of pictured him as sort of the ultimate angsty teen, because Han Solo and Carrie Fisher, Han Solo and Leia, More or less, I don't think they would be great parents. I think Han would certainly be just sort of off roaming the galaxy because, it's Han Solo, and I'm guessing that probably Leia would have to do some sort of duties considering she's a princess and all that. So I think that they just probably weren't very present in his life. And so he was essentially driven to the dark side by being an angsty teenager with no parental influence.
I think that that's a part of it, but I also think that there's definitely something there. He definitely identifies as being someone very similar, or definitely identifies with Darth Vader, because he even has that relic of Darth Vader's half melted helmet. So I've got to think that there was some sort of deep-seated connection that he felt with Darth Vader that caused him to join the Knights of Ren, that caused him to align with the First Order.
So how did he get that helmet?
That is one of those things where I could speculate, but I really don't have an idea. I really don't know how he got that helmet, because the Darth Vader. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Darth Vader died on the Death Star, or did they bring his body back to cremate it? I don't remember actually. In Return of the Jedi,
they did bring his body back.
Okay, so that's all right. So they brought his body back to be burned. So then it would make sense that, the helmet would have to come back, otherwise it would have been on the Death Star that blowed up. So, okay, so that would leave the helmet either on Endor or in the care of Han or Leia or Luke or Lando, right?
Yeah.
That's okay. So I assume that they wouldn't leave it on Endor, so I'm assuming that Luke probably kept it, and I'm really just doing all this thinking out loud because this is one that I'm not really sure about and haven't really thought about. So I imagine that Luke had it lying around. I'm actually describing to you the plot of Episode 8. The writers phoned me up. This is basically what happens. Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo as he was known then, finds in his grandpa's house this relic of a terrible, terrible Sith Lord, asks, "What's this?" And Luke replies, "This is your grandfather's. He was really evil." And that just sort of plants the seed in Ben's
and that was it.
Head and Ben's heart, and it was just all downhill from there. It was just all downhill from there.
So you don't think there's any chance that Kylo Ren is a double agent?
I don't think so. I don't think that would serve the plot in any positive way, because that would just undermine his character.
Yeah, I think if they did something like that, I think that would be awful, because at least right now we've seen no indications that is even a possible thing that could happen. And so if they did plant that, then they're doing a really poor job, and it'll be a horrible plot twist at the end.
Do people think that?
Some people.
I hadn't heard that. I think it's interesting that some people think that, but I think that is a terrible thing, because now that I'm thinking about it more, yeah, because that's so not who Kylo Ren's character is, in my opinion at least. And actually, I'm going to ask a quick question. How do you feel about the amount of angst that is in Kylo Ren's character?
Oh my goodness, I love it so much. Oh my goodness. The moments when he just smashes his console, he just takes out his lightsaber and just smashes things. That's so beautiful. It's so human. It's just such a normal thing to do. That's just what an actual angsty teenager would do if they had a lightsaber. They would just be I'm so angry, and they just smash things. Yeah. I think it's fantastic.
First of all, I really enjoyed The Force Awakens, but I think the moment that I was sitting in the theater the first time, the exact moment where I thought, okay, this is a good movie, and I'm absolutely on board with this, is the moment where Kylo Ren takes out his lightsaber and just slashes through this computer, because that is exactly what someone who has so little control over their emotions and their actions, that is absolutely what their reaction would be. And I found that to be so believable. I know a lot of people have a problem with that level of angst, but to me, that just makes his character more interesting and believable.
Honestly, it makes him seem more like a Sith than honestly Sidious or Vader ever looked like, because they seem to have control over their emotions. But really what a Sith is supposed to have is they're supposed to be just sort of this volatile energy emotion pool.
Because it's power through emotion.
Exactly, and you got to see that with Kylo Ren. You got to see, I'm so angry, and I get my power through that. Whereas Sidious, it was just like, I'm sort of controlled, but I'm also dark side.
Yeah, I really, really like the direction that they are going with Kylo Ren in that he's not necessarily as absolute pure evil as the Emperor was, but it's definitely more believable.
Yeah, no, I think it's done really, really well. That was definitely my favorite moment personally.
All right, I have a question. How did Maz get Luke's lightsaber? Because that was really the only time that they explicitly set something up for the future movie, because they asked Maz, how did you get this lightsaber? And she replies, that's a great story for another time. So I definitely feel like we're going to get the answer. But
I don't
in the
think we're going to get it.
You don't?
I really don't think we're ever going to get it because it doesn't make any sense.
She absolutely sets it up, though. She totally sets it up. She says, that's a great question for another time.
But where would she have gotten it from? And which lightsaber are we talking about?
It's
the one from Empire Strikes Back, or the one from Return of the Jedi?
The one that it is the one from Empire Strikes Back, because the one that Luke uses in Return of the Jedi is green.
Exactly.
He makes a new lightsaber, and we've seen it. This one's blue. So how do you think Maz got it?
She can't have. It's impossible. It fell into space.
Okay, so it's like the One Ring. It has a mind of its own and was found by the most unlikely of creatures?
No, it's a plot hole.
There's gotta be, because I can't believe that they would intentionally leave a plot hole that big, and especially since they set it up like they're definitely going to have an answer.
I just think that the writers said, hey, this will be a really cool thing to put in there if we actually just use Luke's lightsaber. And so they did. And they didn't give any real thought into how they actually could have gotten it, because there is no way. It falls down that gigantic chute. It could have gone anywhere. Are we supposed to believe that somehow it fell into a passing ship, or somehow it fell to the earth somewhere and someone picked it up and said, this is Luke's lightsaber?
No, I mean, I do think we're going to get the answer, but I am worried that it's not going to be a very good one, because, I mean, I'm thinking, and literally what's coming to mind is it floats through space and through some divine providence finds its way.
I mean, that's the only possible solution, and I'm not happy with that, so I'm hoping it just never gets brought up again. So
you would prefer that it never get answered or brought up than have it be a bad answer?
100%, because in the movie theater where I was, when she says that line, when she's like, oh, that's a great story, I'll tell you another day, we all laughed. Like, that, the audience laughed because we were like, ha, we know you're never going to tell us.
Interesting. You're with a very witty, smart, and cynical audience, I feel, compared to me.
Yeah, it's my family.
Okay.
Anyway, moving on. So we're coming up towards the end of the show, and normally we do some type of video game pitch, and so
that's right, video games.
and so since this is a video game show, and we've been talking about Star Wars for a while, let's just pitch some type of a Star Wars video game.
Okay, so the game that I'm going to pitch, and I talked about it in the very first show because this is one of my very first games, is the game Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, which follows the story of Vader's secret apprentice, codenamed Starkiller, real name Galen Merrick, and it's one of those games that is pretty mediocre in terms of good story, but it's a very good action game, and I feel a very good Star Wars game if you just want to feel like a total badass, and you have this lightsaber that you hold backwards behind you because you're awesome, and you literally tear a Star Destroyer out of the sky and into the planet below because you're awesome, and you can level up your Force Lightning and Force Push and just wreak total havoc. It's a total power trip playing. If you really just want a huge rush and to know what it feels like being extremely powerful with a lightsaber and with the Force, then this is the game for you.
Now, when I first saw that the trailers for Force Unleashed come out, I just assumed it was some sort of a weird mobile game that wasn't going to be very good.
I mean, okay, so it's a lot of fun. It is genuinely a lot of fun, which is very different from being a very good movie. I would equate it to, the new Jurassic Park movie. Is it a lot of fun to watch? Yes. Is it a hallmark of what quality cinema can be? Not necessarily. So that is my defense of Star Wars Force Unleashed. Is it a good game? No, not necessarily, but it is a lot of fun to play, especially if you are a fan of the Star Wars universe.
You're making me want to go back and watch the new Jurassic Park movie now.
So, Matt, what's your game?
My game is going to be Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. It's an old game, but it was produced by BioWare, and essentially what it is it's the Star Wars universe about 4,000 years before any of the events in the sort of the movies that we saw. It's back when there were tons of Jedi, tons of Sith, and they were all sort of fighting against each other in this big, massive galactic war. And you're one of those characters. You can choose to sort of align yourself with the Sith or align yourself with the light side, and you sort of go through this incredibly epic story. And I think it's just fantastic in the way that it does progression, in the way that it does combat, because you get to actually watch characters' lightsabers lock like they normally would in a battle. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. Plus, since it's a BioWare game, you get some limited levels of choice.
Yeah, so if you like Star Wars and you like Mass Effect or Dragon Age, this is the game for you.
Yeah, and then maybe play the second one, and then maybe play the MMO version, the Old Republic.
Ooh, okay. So thank you for joining us for a full 2 hours of Star Wars. This has been quite the time. I've absolutely had a blast sitting here and talking. What about you, Matt?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we talk about Star Wars basically every day, so this has just been sort of nice to talk to other people about it as well.
Yep, this has been fantastic. So this has been Gaming Society Radio Hour. I'm your co-host, James.
And I'm Matthew.
And this has been WMCM 91.7 McAllister Radio. Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.